Well, the Israeli military says it's acting under the instruction of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. It says the operation in Gaza could extend beyond airstrikes. It said it's been instructed by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the Defense Minister to take strong action against Hamas in the Gaza Strip. It's also threatening to increase military force due to a delay in talks for the release of Israeli captives and Hamas' repeated rejection of all proposals it's received. In a post on Telegram, the army has been writing that it's targeting locations belonging to Hamas. The Israeli government has suspended school for students living near the border with Gaza. Ori Goldberg is an Israeli political commentator. He's joining us now from Tel Aviv. Good to have you with us on Al Jazeera. How much of this do you think is about trying to pressure Hamas, and how much of it is trying to appease the far right and the Netanyahu coalition who want that return to war in Gaza?
I think both are correct, but I would add to those two desperate attempts to stall and obstruct the mass protests expected against Netanyahu's government by both former senior security leaders later today, and a massive demonstration expected on Wednesday as the government discusses Netanyahu's proposal to dismiss the head of Shin.
So predominantly with regard to the domestic pressures, how much of that now are playing into the decisions that we're seeing? I know you've just referred to it slightly there, but I want you to expand on it just to give us a sense of context here, because up in the months prior to this point, it has not appeared that domestic considerations, or at least domestic pressures in terms of the protests on the streets and so on, have had much influence on the Netanyahu coalition. And yet you seem to be suggesting that there is now an awareness, at least by the coalition, of the amount of pressure that is being brought.
Well, the situation has changed. Investigations have been opened by both Israel's National Police and Shin Bet itself into the behavior of Netanyahu and senior employees in the Prime Minister's office. And the protests have been rekindled against the background of these new investigations, and with the full knowledge and testimonies of the returned captives from Gaza, suggesting that the Israeli hostages are truly physically languishing, which means that very few Israelis are buying Netanyahu's claim that these renewed bombings are applying pressure that will ultimately achieve the war's goal and bring about the release of the hostages. It's left to be seen whether these protests will be held today evening, Israel time, and tomorrow in the morning and throughout the day. If they are held, then Netanyahu is not a winner. Netanyahu does not emerge triumphant from this new unholy alliance he has forged with his new appointee as IDF Chief of Staff General Eyal Zamir. In fact, I think were Washington to look at Israel beleaguered by real demonstrations and protests against Netanyahu, Washington would find it just as easy to call for renewed negotiations. In fact, I think you can see from Israel's behavior that Israel itself is not calling for a halt to talks. It will reassess the situation in the morning. It will cease these strikes. Israeli posturing of this sort is quite the MO for Israel and has been for a long time.
On that basis, I want to get your assessment of where you think the ceasefire talks stand at the moment. As far as Hamas is concerned, it's saying that Israel has unilaterally broken the ceasefire. And yet, if I understand what you're saying correctly, that this is a modus operandi that we've seen before from the Israeli military and the Netanyahu coalition. They will reassess. So there is a chance, at least, that the ceasefire talks may continue?
I don't think the ceasefire has been scuppered totally and absolutely. I don't think this is a resumption of the war. Again, look at Israel's strikes. Israel is striking from the air as it did for long weeks before ground entry into Gaza, and there's a reason for that. The willingness of Israelis to join in their hundreds of thousands and enter Gaza on the ground is much less resilient than it was on October 8th, 2023. Israel is bombing because that's the only thing Israel can do to demonstrate its quote-unquote strength. It's worth mentioning that Israel bombed in Lebanon and bombed in Gaza, and that all this comes as Israel likely attempts a copycat version of the U.S.'s bombing in Yemen. This is what Israel can do. This is what the U.S. can do. This is the only way Israel has to broadcast any kind of intentions or to move the process forward. Hamas is right in its claims that Israel has been unilaterally violating the ceasefire, not just tonight, but throughout its duration. It remains to be seen whether Trump considers Israel's war mark of virtue in and of itself, or whether it sees this bombing, just like it sees its bombing in Yemen, as an incentive for regional players to reach a grand bargain. I would be cautiously optimistic the dreams of a grand bargain have not been abandoned by the wayside as of now. I don't think we will see the strikes continue for a full day tomorrow. I doubt we'll see them continue tomorrow at night. A lot of it depends on whether these demonstrations in Israel do actually go forward. And allegations are leveled against Netanyahu, which he cannot obfuscate or manipulate in any real powerful way.
So is the attention predominantly on whether or not the demonstrations are going to go forward, as you say, or is there also attention being paid to how Hamas reacts to this? What would Israel need to see from Hamas in order to be able to justify, if you like, stopping the attacks that it has begun within the last few hours?
Well, I think from what I'm seeing from Hamas, Hamas has no plans to respond or engage Israel militarily. Hamas can't engage Israel militarily when Israel uses its fighter pilots. That is, by the way, the great majority of the armaments the United States have supplied to Israel. I think if Hamas does not respond into the later hours of this morning, then Israel might be officially amenable to entreatments from Washington to renew potential talks, or from the regional mediators to renew potential talks. Again, Israel does this repeatedly. It did this in Lebanon over at least 2 wars. It did this in Gaza. Every time there was a sign of some kind of crisis, Israel would increase the volume of its attacks and its bombings in an attempt to project strength. Netanyahu now knows that most Israelis don't buy his version of achieving the war's goals. He's all in on this because it's the only thing he can do. He has left himself without options, especially if the demonstrations do actually take place. If Hamas continues to call for a resumption of the talks and calls for accusing Israel of unilateral violations and maintains the diplomatic track, I doubt Israel can do much but either resume the bombing or resume the talks. In any case, this isn't a war. This is Israeli manipulation. It's intentional and it's thought out.
Ori, as always, thank you very much indeed for giving us the benefit of your thoughts on this. Ori Goldberg, thank you.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.